There's a military tactic that conquered Europe in weeks, crushed armies in days, and rewrote the rules of warfare. It's called Blitzkrieg, and if modern fighter jets had existed in 1940, the German war machine would have been annihilated before it crossed the Polish border. In May 1940, Germany invaded France with 2,445 tanks and 1,000 aircraft. They broke through the Ardennes forest, bypassed the Maginot Line, and reached Paris in 6 weeks. It says more soldiers and better defensive positions. They still lost because the Blitzkrieg moved faster than they could respond. 338,000 Allied troops were trapped at Dunkirk. France surrendered on June 22nd. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland with 2,000 tanks and 1,300 aircraft advancing in coordinated columns. Polish cavalry charged German tanks. Polish fighters were outnumbered 5-1. Warsaw fell in 28 days. The entire nation was conquered in 5 weeks. The speed was unprecedented. The world was shocked. In April 1941, Germany invaded Yugoslavia and Greece with 1,200 tanks and 1,000 aircraft. Yugoslavia surrendered in 11 days. Greece fell in 24 days. The Balkans were conquered faster than anyone thought possible. The Blitzkrieg seemed unstoppable. But here's what should terrify military historians. Every single Blitzkrieg victory depended on 3 things: concentrated armor columns, close air support, and supply lines stretching across open roads. A single squadron of modern F-35 SEG could have destroyed all 3 in a matter of hours. This is how modern fighter jets would have stopped the Blitzkrieg. Why WWI's most devastating tactic would become a death sentence against 21st century air power. And why the entire German war strategy would have collapsed on day 1. Before we destroy the Blitzkrieg, you need to understand what made it revolutionary and why it worked so devastatingly well against 1940s defenses. Blitzkrieg wasn't just fast attack. It was the coordination of armor, infantry, and air power in a way that overwhelmed enemy defenses before they could respond. The Germans didn't invent individual components. They invented the system that combined them. Here's how it worked. German panzer divisions concentrated at a single weak point in enemy lines. Stuka dive bombers destroyed enemy artillery and fortifications. Panzers broke through the gap. Infantry followed to secure territory. The breakthrough force drove deep into enemy rear areas, destroying supply lines and command centers before defenders could regroup. The key was speed and concentration. Instead of fighting along the entire front, Germany massed overwhelming force at one point. They drove forward relentlessly. Enemy armies couldn't retreat faster than panzers advanced. Enemy commanders couldn't respond faster than Stukas destroyed their communications. The Blitzkrieg succeeded because 1940s militaries couldn't counter it. Allied fighters were inferior to German Bf 109 SEF. Allied anti-aircraft guns couldn't stop mass Stuka attacks. Allied tanks couldn't match German coordination. Allied commanders used WWI tactics against WWI warfare, but the Blitzkrieg had catastrophic vulnerabilities. The tank columns were exposed targets advancing in predictable patterns. The supply lines were single roads stretching hundreds of miles. The air support operated from forward airfields with minimal defenses. Against 1940s capabilities, these vulnerabilities were manageable. Against modern fighter jets, they would be fatal. Let me show you exactly how an F-35 squadron would have turned Germany's greatest strength into its greatest weakness. Modern fighter jets operate in a different reality than WWE aircraft. The technology gap isn't incremental, it's categorical. An F-35 versus a Bf 109 isn't David versus Goliath. It's a god versus an insect, speed and altitude. A Bf 109 flew at 380 miles per hour at 30,000 feet maximum. An F-35 flies at 1,200 miles per hour at 50,000 feet. The WWI fighter would never see the modern jet. It would be shot down before its pilot knew he was in combat. Weapons range. Eurofighters had machine guns with effective range of 400 yards. They had to get close to shoot. An F-35 carries AM-120 missiles with a range of 100 miles. It can destroy 30 enemy aircraft before any of them get within visual range. Radar and sensors. WWI pilots navigated by sight and basic instruments. An F-35 has radar that can track 100 targets simultaneously at 150 miles. It has infrared sensors that can detect aircraft by their heat signature through clouds. It has computer systems that identify threats and prioritize targets automatically. Stealth technology. WWI fighters were visible on radar from 50 miles away. An F-35 is designed to be invisible to radar. By the time a WWI radar operator detected something, the F-35 would have already destroyed its targets and left the area. But here's the devastating capability for stopping Blitzkrieg. Modern fighter jets carry precision-guided munitions that can destroy ground targets with perfect accuracy. WI fighters dropped bombs by eye or strafed with machine guns, requiring multiple passes and luck. An F-35 can destroy 100 tanks in a single sortie using guided missiles, never flying below 40,000 feet, never entering anti-aircraft range. The technology gap is so extreme that WBU militaries couldn't comprehend it. It would be like fighting with swords against machine guns. The battle would be one-sided massacre, not combat. If France had possessed just 12 F-35 SEF in May 1940, the German invasion through the Ardennes would have ended in the forest. The entire Blitzkrieg strategy would have collapsed in a single day. The historical invasion concentrated 1,500 German tanks in a 50-mile corridor through the Ardennes forest. This was the brilliant strategic move, attacking through difficult terrain that French commanders thought was impassable for armor. The Germans moved slowly through the forest roads, bumper to bumper, taking 3 days to emerge. This concentration was the Blitzkrieg's strength in 1940. But against modern air power, it would be suicide. 1,500 tanks on narrow forest roads, unable to disperse, moving slowly in columns that stretched for miles. It would be the perfect target. Here's how 12 F-35 SUK would have destroyed the invasion. Each jet carries 8 GBU-39 small-diameter bombs, precision-guided munitions that can destroy a tank from 40 miles away. That's 96 precision strikes per sortie. Flying above German anti-aircraft range, protected by stealth technology, completely invisible to German radar. The math is simple and brutal. 12 F-35 SEL flying 4 sorties per day could destroy 384 tanks. In 3 days, the time it took German armor to traverse the Ardennes, the F-35, the entire German armored spearhead would have been annihilated before it reached French defensive lines. But the destruction wouldn't stop with tanks. The F-35 SUF would target the supply trucks following the panzers. Every fuel tanker, every ammunition truck, every supply vehicle, without fuel and ammunition, the surviving tanks would be useless. Without bridges, the entire column would be trapped. The Germans would have no effective response. Their Bf 109 fighters couldn't reach the F-35 SUF, flying at 45,000 feet. Their flak guns couldn't elevate high enough. Their radar couldn't detect stealth aircraft. They would watch helplessly as their invasion force was systematically destroyed by an enemy they couldn't see or fight, destroyed supply vehicles, and demoralized troops. The Blitzkrieg knew. The tactic that conquered France in 6 weeks would have been stopped in 2 days by a dozen aircraft. And that's just one example. Every Blitzkrieg campaign had the same vulnerability, concentrated forces on predictable routes. Modern air power would have turned that concentration into a killing zone. The Stuka dive bomber was the Blitzkrieg's critical weapon. It provided precision close air support, destroying enemy strong points and enabling tank breakthroughs. The Stuka would go from devastating weapon to helpless target. In historical campaigns, Germany committed hundreds of Stukas to each invasion. They flew at 250 miles per hour, dove to 1,500 feet to drop bombs, then climbed slowly back to altitude. They were vulnerable to ground fire and enemy fighters, but German air superiority protected them. Against F-35s, the Stuka fleet would be annihilated in minutes. Modern air-to-air missiles have a range of 100 miles. An F-35 could shoot down 50 Stukas before any of them knew they were under attack. The dive bombers would fall from the sky like rain, destroyed by missiles fired from aircraft they couldn't see on radar, they didn't know existed. But here's what makes it worse for Germany. Stukas operated from forward airfields near the front lines. These airfields were visible from the air, lightly defended, and packed with aircraft. A single F-35 using cluster munitions could destroy an entire airfield in one pass. The historical invasion of Poland used 1,300 German aircraft. Most were based at a dozen forward airfields in occupied territory. An F-35 squadron could have destroyed all 12 airfields in a single day. Every aircraft on the ground would be destroyed. Every ammunition storage bunker in flames. The Luftwaffe would cease to exist in 24 hours. Not defeated, annihilated. The air superiority that enabled every Blitzkrieg victory would be gone. German armor would advance without air support, vulnerable to enemy air attack, unable to coordinate with grounded aircraft. And here's the strategic disaster for Germany. The Luftwaffe took years to build and required Germany's entire industrial capacity. Those 1,300 aircraft represented thousands of pilots trained over years, hundreds of mechanics, millions of man-hours of construction. Losing them in a day would be unrecoverable. Germany couldn't replace the losses. Their aircraft factories could produce 300 planes per month. Against modern fighters destroying 5,100 aircraft per day, German air power would decline continuously. Within a month, the Luftwaffe would be reduced to hiding in dispersed fields, unable to support ground operations, irrelevant to the war. The Blitzkrieg without air support is just armor columns advancing into prepared defenses. That's not revolutionary warfare. That's suicide. Modern fighter jets wouldn't just defeat German air power, they would eliminate it as a factor in the war. The Blitzkrieg depended on supply lines stretching hundreds of miles from Germany to the front lines. Every tank needed 200 gallons of fuel per day. Food and equipment. These supplies traveled on vulnerable roads in exposed truck convoys. Modern fighter jets would turn those supply lines into burning wreckage. In the historical French campaign, German supply lines stretched 300 miles from German railheads to the front. Thousands of trucks moved constantly, bringing fuel and ammunition to advancing panzers. The convoys were vulnerable to air attack, but Allied air power was too weak to significantly disrupt them. F-35 would have destroyed every supply convoy in a single day. Using targeting pods with infrared sensors, they could identify and track every vehicle on every road. Using precision munitions, they could destroy trucks without missing. A single F-35 could eliminate 50 trucks per sortie, turning supply lines into flaming barriers of destroyed vehicles. But here's the devastating tactic. Instead of attacking convoys directly, F-35s would destroy bridges, tunnels, and choke points. A single 2,000-pound bomb can collapse a bridge. Destroying just 10 bridges would sever Germany's supply routes completely. The math becomes impossible for Germany. Panzers advancing 50 miles per day need fuel delivered continuously. If supply trucks can't get through because bridges are destroyed, the tanks stop moving. If the tanks stop moving, the Blitzkrieg stops working. If the Blitzkrieg stops working, German armor is exposed in enemy territory without support. Within 3 days, Germany's entire armored force would be immobilized. Out of fuel, out of ammunition, surrounded by enemy forces they bypassed during their advance. The panzers that reached deepest into enemy territory would be the first to run dry. The historic breakthrough to the English Channel would have been a death trap, and Germany would have no solution. But F-35T would destroy them again overnight. They could disperse supply routes. But modern targeting systems would find every truck. They could use night convoys. But infrared sensors see in darkness. Every tactical adjustment would fail because the technology gap was insurmountable. The Blitzkrieg strategy was advance faster than the enemy can respond. But against modern air power, the strategy becomes advance into a trap you can't escape. Speed becomes liability when your supply lines are being systematically destroyed behind you. The psychological impact of modern fighter jets on German forces would have been as devastating as the physical destruction. WWI soldiers could understand their enemies. Modern stealth aircraft would have been incomprehensible terror. Imagine being a German tank commander in 1940. Winning battles, conquering territory. Suddenly the tank in front of you explodes. Then the one behind you. Then yours. You never saw an aircraft. You never heard an engine. You never had a chance to respond. Just instant death from an invisible enemy. The jets fly at 45,000 feet, invisible specks to the naked eye. Their missiles are supersonic case. You can't hear them coming. The first indication of attack is your vehicle exploding. The fear 35 is gone. WWI soldiers had concepts for air attack. You heard engines. You saw aircraft. You shot back with anti-aircraft guns. You took cover. You had agency in your survival. Modern airstrikes remove all agency. You can't hide from thermal imaging. You can't hear supersonic missiles. Orders to advance would be met with refusal. Soldiers would desert rather than move on roads where comrades disappeared in flames. Tank crews would abandon their vehicles. The psychological foundation of military discipline would collapse when death became random and unstoppable. But here's what makes it worse. Germany's military culture valued bravery, discipline, and aggression. Those virtues are worthless against an enemy you can't reach. You can't be brave against invisible aircraft. You can't maintain discipline when following orders means death. You can't be aggressive when advancing means dying. The Wehrmacht would suffer a psychological break. The military force that conquered Europe through audacity and aggression would become paralyzed by fear of an enemy they couldn't comprehend. Commanders would stop ordering advances. Soldiers would refuse to move. The offensive momentum that defined Blitzkrieg would evaporate, and the German high command would have no answers. They could order troops forward, but orders don't matter when soldiers know they're marching to certain death. They could threaten punishment, but execution by your own side is less terrifying than invisible death from above. The entire command structure would break down. Modern fighter jets wouldn't just destroy German military capability. They would destroy German military psychology. The will to fight would collapse faster than the tanks burned. Beyond the immediate tactical destruction, modern fighter jets would have forced Germany to abandon the Blitzkrieg strategy entirely and revert to WWI-style warfare they were designed to avoid. Germany developed Blitzkrieg specifically to avoid WWI's static warfare. They couldn't win a long war of attrition. They didn't have the resources for sustained conflict. The entire strategy was win quickly before the enemy mobilizes. Fast victories through rapid movement and concentrated force. Modern air power would make rapid movement suicidal. Concentrated forces become concentrated targets. Rapid advances create exposed supply lines. Forward momentum puts your troops in enemy territory without support. Every Blitzkrieg principle would become a vulnerability. Germany would be forced to disperse. Instead of concentrating 1,500 tanks in narrow corridors, they would need to spread across hundreds of miles to avoid being destroyed in mass. But dispersed forces can't achieve breakthrough. Dispersed forces fight everywhere and win nowhere. Germany would be forced to move slowly. Instead of advancing 50 miles per day, they would need to advance 5 miles per day, securing supply lines and building defenses as they moved. But slow advances give defenders time to mobilize. Slow advances allow enemy forces to concentrate against you. Germany would be forced back to WWI tactics, set-piece battles, artillery preparation, infantry advances, trench warfare, everything the Blitzkrieg was designed to avoid. And Germany couldn't win that kind of war. They tried in 1914 to 1918 and lost. But here's the strategic catastrophe. Germany's entire war plan depended on quick victories. Defeat France before Britain mobilizes. Defeat Poland before the Soviets intervene. Defeat the Balkans before the Mediterranean is secured. And modern air power would destroy every timetable. The war Germany could fight would be the war Germany would lose. Without Blitzkrieg, Germany was a medium-sized industrial power fighting against enemies with greater populations, more resources, and stronger economies. The only way Germany could win was through decisive early victories. Modern fighter jets would make decisive early victories impossible. Germany's strategic options would collapse, attack, and die to air power, defend, and lose slowly to superior numbers. Negotiate from weakness. There would be no path to victory, no military solution, no way to achieve their strategic goals. The entire justification for Nazi aggression would evaporate. The military believed Germany could win through superior tactics and fighting spirit. Modern air power would prove that tactics don't matter when the enemy has weapons you can't counter. Fighting spirit doesn't matter when you're being destroyed by aircraft you can't see. The broader implications of modern fighter jets in 1940 extend far beyond stopping the Blitzkrieg. The entire course of WW would have been different, with consequences rippling through history. No successful invasion of France means no Dunkirk evacuation. The British Expeditionary Force wouldn't be trapped because German armor wouldn't break through. No desperate evacuation of 338,000 troops. No miracle of Dunkirk that became a defining moment in British history. No fall of France means no Vichy government. France wouldn't surrender because France wouldn't be defeated. No collaboration, no resistance, no occupation. The entire dynamic of occupied Europe would be different. No occupation of Western Europe means no Holocaust expansion. The industrial killing of European Jews required German control of Poland, France, and Eastern Europe. Without Blitzkrieg victories establishing that control, the Holocaust scope would have been dramatically reduced. No German victories mean no German prestige. Hitler's power depended on military success. The German people supported the war because they were winning. A series of catastrophic defeats would have undermined Nazi support and potentially triggered internal collapse. But here's the most significant change. No Blitzkrieg success means no Operation Barbarossa. Catastrophic losses to modern air power would have convinced Hitler that invading the USSR was suicide. No Eastern Front means no Stalingrad, no Kursk, no Soviet advance to Berlin. The war that killed 27 million Soviets and defined the 20th century would never occur. The Soviet Union wouldn't emerge as a superpower. The Cold War wouldn't happen. The entire geopolitical structure of the post-war world would be unrecognizable. The world in 1945 would be radically different. No Soviet control of Eastern Europe, no Iron Curtain, no Berlin Wall, no nuclear standoff. The entire second half of the 20th century would unfold along completely different lines. A single squadron of F-35 SEMP, properly employed, could have stopped every German invasion in 1939 to 1941. The technology gap was that extreme. The vulnerabilities were that catastrophic. If modern fighter jets had existed in 1940, the Blitzkrieg would have been stopped dead in the Ardennes forest. The tactic that conquered Europe in weeks would have been destroyed in days. The German armored columns would have been annihilated. 1,500 tanks destroyed by precision munitions fired from aircraft flying too high to see. The concentrated force that was Blitzkrieg's strength would have been its fatal weakness against modern air power. The Luftwaffe would have been eliminated. Every Stuka dive bomber shot down. Every fighter destroyed. Every airfield obliterated. The air superiority that enabled German victories would have been gone in 24 hours, unrecoverable in months. The supply lines would have been severed, every bridge destroyed, every convoy burned, every choke point blocked. German armor would have advanced into a trap, then stopped in enemy territory as fuel ran out and ammunition was exhausted. The psychological impact would have broken German forces. No defense against supersonic missiles. No way to fight back against aircraft you couldn't see. The will to fight would have collapsed as fast as the tanks burned. Germany would have been forced to abandon Blitzkrieg entirely. Dispersed forces moving slowly with secure supply lines. WI tactics that Germany couldn't win with. A strategic dead end with no path to victory. The technology gap was absolute and insurmountable. Precision munitions and beyond visual range missiles, they would have been fighting with medieval technology against modern weapons. The outcome would have been predetermined. But here's what this thought experiment really reveals. Military tactics are only as good as the technology that enables them. The Blitzkrieg was brilliant in 1940 because 1940 defenses couldn't stop it. Against 2025 capabilities, it would have been a suicide mission. Every military doctrine has hidden assumptions about enemy capabilities. The Blitzkrieg assumed enemies couldn't destroy massed armor from the air. It assumed supply lines could be defended. It assumed air superiority was achievable. Modern fighter jets would have invalidated every assumption. And those lessons apply to current military thinking too. Today's doctrines make assumptions about future warfare. What happens when those assumptions meet technologies we haven't imagined? What happens when the tactics that seem brilliant today become death sentences against tomorrow's weapons? Could modern fighter jets stop the Blitzkrieg? Absolutely. Completely. Catastrophically. 12 F-35C would have ended Germany's war machine before it left the Ardennes. But the real question is, what's the Blitzkrieg of 2025 that future technology will make obsolete? Because military history teaches us that every seemingly unbeatable tactic eventually meets a weapon that makes it suicidal. And when that happens, wars end quickly, just like the Blitzkrieg would have ended in 1940 if modern fighter jets had been there to stop it.